activities, or quantitatively on the financial side of things, the right hire is likely to have impact on at least one of your organization's measures of success, whether it is on that qualitative or quantitative side of the books. And then, of course, your goals, achieving those desired ROI numbers is going to correlate on some level to the organization's goal objectives. So if, for instance, research supports care for cancer, the individual that you hire could have direct impact on the quality of the research that the organization does. So in terms of devising your strategy, we see that the definition of strategy is a plan of action designed to achieve a particular goal. And so when you're thinking about your recruitment strategy, you have to keep in mind, and you should keep in mind, your organization's values. So for those of you in recruitment responsibilities, you are the keepers of your organization's values. It's an expectation that you, as the recruiter representative, for lack of just a generalized term, that you are going to be that first point of contact for the job seeker. And so they will be looking for you to emulate those organizational values. So get to know those values intimately, because you are going to be representing them to those people that are interested to work for your organization. Your philosophy you want your people to proudly see you have concept of mission, you are going to be the keepers of your organization's values, but you also need to align those values with what your brand is all about. Your organization will have a very unique and or supporters expect you to behave or expect the kind of work that you do. There will be key indicators of job seekers' hiring experience. So individuals out there are more savvy now than they've ever been about the kinds of organizations that they want to work for. And while you are investigating them, make no mistake that they are investigating you as well. And of course, internally, you'll want to ensure that you've got things in place to give your employees the best level of work experience. So what does this look like when you put it all together? As an example, from my UNICEF days, there was a very clear mission that the organization was working towards: every child, every opportunity, no exceptions. Their vision was no child left behind. They had very specific values in which they operated, things like resourcefulness, like inclusiveness. And then, of course, the internal retention strategies are what helped to improve and bolster the employee engagement levels within the organization. So all of these things come together when you are going out to the market to attract those individuals. The mission is that intrinsic captivator that every organization has, that is not necessarily similar from one organization to the next. Different people are attracted to different mandates. The vision of the organization as well is an area that those individuals may or may not cling to. Certainly the values that the organization depicts itself as having are going to be those components that the job seeker is looking at in a more close way. Do those values align with their own values? For instance, we know Gen Y is very interested to work with environmentally conscious organizations. And so within your values, do you have greening related activities that demonstrate your commitment to being environmentally conscious? Internally, your retention strategies will influence the levels of turnover, the levels of opportunity for succession through the organization, the professional and ongoing professional development that an employee may or may not be able to enjoy while they work with you. These are the things that come together to make your brand attractive to job seekers out there. So I'm just going to pause here to check in if there are any questions that have come up along the way.
Hi, Veronica. Sorry about that. And just so that everyone knows, we do know that we had a bit of audio difficulty, so we're on that. And do please just stay patient with us. Hopefully it'll continue to work okay. Veronica, we do have a question about diversification, and if we're wanting to diversify their workforce team, about how to go ahead and do that in the job posting.
So if I understand the question correctly, if your organization is thinking about integrating diversity as a value within the organization, then how do you actually incorporate that into your strategy? So I would have to say it will depend on what actual criteria of diversity you're looking to expand on. So for instance, there are 4 designated groups within employment equity that speak to diversity. We have women, Aboriginals, disabled, and visible minorities. And so if you have a strategy to increase the possibility of women of moving through the organization, then that might be an area that you focus on in terms of your recruitment strategy. And so where do you find women in terms of the places that you would advertise? Or if it's we need to increase our Aboriginal contingency within the organization because our work does affect them, then it's partnering perhaps with Aboriginal communities so that you can begin to understand where those job seekers hang out and how you can begin to connect with those job seekers. Hopefully that helps.
That's great. Thanks, Veronica.
Any other questions?
Nope, that's it so far.
Okay, we'll carry on. Alrighty, so when we take a look at recruitment and selection, they are actually 2 separate activities. Recruitment, in its simplest terms, is the act of attracting a qualified pool of applicants. So some key outcomes for you within the recruitment stage of things is certainly to generate a pool of qualified applicants, to achieve management goals and objectives while meeting your current legal requirements. Again, for those that might be new in the area of recruitment, there are certainly a number of regulatory elements that you need to be aware of, like employment standards, like human rights, and how they influence the kinds of activities you should and shouldn't be doing while you're recruiting. And then lastly, to be broad in reach and transparency. You want to attract as many possible candidates without excluding those through your recruitment activities. Selection, on the other hand, is the process of actually identifying the right candidate. And so some outcomes that you're looking at in this process is to identify key job criteria for successful performance in the job. So you have to know, what does success look like when it's being performed on the job? With those criteria, you're then able to identify qualified candidates relative to what's required in that job. And then you're going to use a series of activities to validate that job criteria: interviews, assessments, and relevant background checks. So let's take a look at that process in its entirety. You're going to start off first with a plan. In most instances, you do have to have some level of approval to move that plan forward. Then you move on to sourcing those candidates. There's a time period in which you're screening and vetting to determine which applicants are actual true candidates to the job that you're looking to fill. You'll go through your process of selection and then, of course, onboarding, the key clincher in a successful process. So we'll break these down one by one. So with your plan, you need to be linking that with your strategic plan. So where the organization is going over the long term and how this role may or may not fit into your organization's long-term activities. And typically that will span over a 3 to 5 year period. The organizational needs in terms of your operational plan or your current fiscal year plan will have impact, again, to the kind of individual and the pool of candidates that you're going to be looking to attract. And with respect to who's going to be part of the recruitment and selection team, you'll need to consider whether those managers need coaching and or training. Are they ready to actually participate in an effective way through this process? And when you're considering your talent pool, bringing you back to your strategy, consider these 4, as I've just mentioned, the women, visible minorities, aboriginal, disabled. How do those 4 designated groups fit into your strategy? Are there others that you should be considering? So there are some organizations that are concentrating on bringing the younger generation into their workplaces because they're mindful that their boomers, those getting close to retirement age, are exiting or planning to exit the organization over the next 5 to 10 years. And so they need to bolster their talent inside to close that gap of talent that's going to be exiting the organization. So you will need to think about who your talent pool or what your talent pool needs to consist of. And of course, the approval process is something that you need to deal with up front. I can tell you firsthand that there is nothing worse than getting through an entire recruitment process only to find out that the T was not crossed and the I was not dotted when financial approval had not been received to actually hire on the job. So up front, hopefully you've got some documentation that allows for you to move forward on that hire. The job description is a must document to have to carry you through the process. It is the foundation from which you will be developing the job criteria as well as the job posting that you will be circulating to attract those individuals. And last but not least, it may sound very trivial, but workspace is a high consideration to keep in mind. You'll need to think about where your individual, or if you're hiring more than one, where these individuals will actually work. Will they be virtual to your space, or will they be actually physically located and setting up shop where your head office or regional or chapter office is located? So how do you go about attracting that talent pool? Again, keeping in mind your branding responsibilities, you'll likely need to work very closely with either your communications or your marketing team to ensure that the messaging that goes out about your organization is consistent, that there is a consistent voice being represented about your organization. So that posting, it's a marketing tool. It's not actually the job description cut and paste into another document. It is a tool that represents to the job seeker what's in it for them if they come to your organization. What can the candidate or the job seeker hope to achieve and experience if they come to work for your organization? Your networks help to create your supply as to where those job seekers are going to come from. So consider, are they internal staff or are they external to your organization? Are they coming from trade associations or are they coming from volunteers? There's a wealth of networks that can be used to help increase your supply of job seekers. Now, many of us who have been in the HR game for a while will recollect the days when we had only newsprint in which to post our vacancies. So the very traditional methods today have been replaced by organizations like Charity Village, who give us real-time opportunities to post a job within minutes and what can be shared vastly through our networks. As most of you know, Charity Village has been in the nonprofit space for over 18 years, and so they've got that experience and understanding of the nonprofit sector to be able to help and facilitate your search as it goes forward. So before we launch the next poll, I would just like to find out if any other questions have come up along the way.
Yes, Veronica, we have a couple other questions about what you were discussing about diversity. Bruce was just asking, is it okay to specifically ask for one of the 4 groups in your job advertisement?
Yes, it's how you position it. You will see at times organizations will place a statement that says they are an equal employment opportunity and pay special attention to these 4 designated groups. So you can actually name them in your posting.
Great. And we also have one other question about whether or not it would be considered discrimination to consider age in the hiring process.
It would absolutely be discriminatory to verbalize that within your posting.
Great. I think that's all for now.
Okay. And so our next survey, we're interested to find out how you have tried using social media as an attraction method.
So Veronica, it looks like it's a little split. We've got 57% for yes and 43% for no.
Okay. So I'm happy to see that you at least have played with it, and others have the opportunity to experience playing with it. So how do you maximize social media, and what is it? In terms of a definition, we went to an interactive site ourselves, Wikipedia. And this is the definition that's there. Refers to the means of interactions among people in which they create, share, and exchange information and ideas in virtual communities and networks. So what does this mean for you, and how does it impact you as a hiring manager? It's interesting to note that from sources where we gathered some research, that 92% of recruiters, and again loosely using that term recruiters, are using social media to source. So in addition to perhaps a posting on Charity Village, they're jumping onto other social media platforms to post their position. 86% of hiring managers are using social media as a screening technique. And what this means is when they receive an application, they will actually jump onto a social media platform to check out information about that applicant. So looking at an individual's behavior online. And then, of course, on the selection front, we see 89% are actually using it to get to a decision around hiring or not hiring. Again, based on behavior that individuals are demonstrating online. More importantly, 73% of individuals out there who have social media accounts are using it for job search activity. So all the more reason for this to be incorporated, integrated into your recruitment strategy. So the next step, after you've planned and you've sourced, you are now at the point of screening. And this is where you need that job description to help you define your job criteria. So to help you understand what are the key nuggets of the job, the key requirements of the job that are going to help me determine who is and who is not the most appropriate candidate for the job. And that will help you assess those resumes. And then you'll want to create some sort of what we call a telescreen document to help you discern that fit. And here we provided you with a screenshot of what that screening tool could look like, and certainly we'll be sharing with you a sample of this document in its entirety so that you can get a sense of how you might use that in your own organization. So once you've gone through the process of screening, you get to your shortlist. You then are in a position to begin the selection process. And you're going to need a variety of selection tools to move you through that process. You'll want to conduct some very consciously structured interviews. And of course, the assessments and backgrounds will need to be, background checks will need to be taken care of before you can move on to your offer and closeouts. So we'll take a look at the tools that you have available to you. You will have the application, which will include that individual's resume. You will have to create an interview guide. So specific to the job that you are going to be recruiting on, you'll need to create very specific questions that will help you discern the individual's capabilities to perform the work that you're going to need them to perform. And I would suggest that you will need some level of assessment to understand the individual's ability to do exactly what it is you need them to do. So for instance, if you need an individual to be able to create macros in Excel, it would be a good idea to give them some level of assessment that confirms their ability to perform macros in Excel. And as it relates to your interview methodologies, there are a number of them that you could use. So you can interview an individual in a one-to-one circumstance, or you can interview as a panel, or what's becoming more and more popular these days are group interviews. So your one-to-one is fairly self-explanatory. It could be yourself as the hiring manager and the applicant. It could be the hiring manager with the applicant. Panels are very popular as it relates to those kinds of organizations who are very team-driven and who are conscious of the fact that no one works on their own. And so they want to get perspectives from different team members on how that individual will fit into the organization. Group interviews are being used by organizations primarily who are hiring in volume. And so rather than having 100 individual interviews, they will hire them, they will interview them in smaller groups, perhaps 10 to 20 in a group, answering similar questions, but in a group setting. And of course, your interview style, again, you have a number of different styles that you can use. However, the behavioral style is more commonly used because it is the best indicator of past behavior to be able to predict future behavior. So you want to use this style to get a good sense of how the individual was able to deal, for instance, with a customer service issue and how they would potentially deal with this issue with you. Scenario interviews or incorporating scenario-related questions into your behavioral interview is also a valid way to get a sense of how an individual will deal with a very specific issue to your organization. And of course, you'll then want to close the process. It will be very important. I can't stress how important it is for you to actually conduct your reference. Oftentimes, it's easy to get excited in the prospect of finding the right candidate and then to want to jump right to the offer without having verified your references. So you'll want to take a breath and take some time to explore that person's experiences to validate everything that you've heard up until this point. So everything you've heard in the telescreen, everything you've heard in your interviews, perhaps what you've discovered through your assessments can then be verified with the references. And I would suggest that you wouldn't want to hire anyone with anything less than 3 references. Personally, I typically check 5 to 7 references because that's when you start to get solid consistency of information about the individual. Your offer is going to bring you right back to your budget and your position in the marketplace. And this will give you the levity of playing room or wiggle room that you have to be able to negotiate an offer that's going to be acceptable to both parties. And something to actually think about as you are managing your brand is the communications piece with the candidates that you are not going to be hiring. Exercise to ensure that you treat those candidates in a way that they can still feel good about your organization even when they don't get the job. I always used to use my own mantra of when I worked in fundraising organizations is you never know where your next big donation is going to come from. So you want to ensure that you're treating those candidates as well as you possibly can. And so onboarding. You have been successful in hiring an individual. They're excited to start with you, and you want to make your first impression the best possible impression that it can be. So at this stage, you want to ensure that, again, all your T's have been crossed, your I's have been dotted, you have a signed offer in hand, you've actually prepared an orientation program for that individual, and that you receive some level of feedback from your candidates through the recruitment process. And you can do that fairly simply through an online survey tool like surveymonkey.com to get some feedback to how your candidates, job seekers, felt as they moved through your process. And of course, you'll want to understand some of the analytics related to your recruitment efforts. How long is the job staying vacant? How many applicants are you able to attract? Where are you attracting those applicants from, etc.? So hopefully, in the last 45 minutes that we've been chatting, you are now in a position to translate the process of recruitment and selection as it relates to your organization. You'll be able to apply the recruitment approaches that make best sense for your organization, and to consider how you might enhance your current applicant assessment methodologies. At this point, I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Hi, Veronica. We've actually had quite a number of questions come in the last few minutes. So just going back to the screening and using social media in screening, we have a question asking about privacy when candidates may have their social media privacy settings, at a place where it may be difficult to view their online presence. What are organizations doing to kind of actually see people online and to do that? Do you have any tips?
Well, if it's not public information, you're not legitimately able to access it. Social media platform that allows you public access is information that you are able to incorporate in.
Sorry, everyone. It looks like we're having a little bit of audio difficulty. If you just bear with us for just a moment. Thanks. Veronica?
Mm-hmm.
So our next question would be how individuals can do group interviews. What are some best practices for that?
So clearly you're going to have the facilities that allows you to conduct meetings in this way. And you will want to have more than one, I'm going to say, facilitator in that group setting, so that you have an individual who is focused on asking the questions, but you have multiple individuals who are actually recording what those responses are. So it becomes a team approach to managing the volume in those group interviews.
Okay, perfect. Awesome.
Great. And do you recommend practical tests as part of the interview process? And how might you recommend people do that?
I recommend practical tests in those roles where you need to understand the individual's ability to carry out a practical component of the work. So, for instance, if you have an administrative assistant or an executive assistant who is going to have to take minutes at board meetings, it would be wise to test that individual's abilities to actually to deal with minutes either from a recorded device or from whatever the source is that the individual would receive those minutes. You need to be able to validate that they will be able to transcribe those minutes in a way that will be efficient and relevant for your organization.
Excellent. And what are some best practices for interviewing people who maybe don't live in the geographic region where your organization is located?
I'm sorry, Marina, could you repeat that?
Absolutely. If you're interviewing someone who is located outside of the geographic region where your organization is located, what are some tips for how to go about doing an interview, whether it's a phone or video or what have you?
So in my time with UNICEF, certainly we made good use of teleconferences, of web conferences, but now you have the wonderful technology of Skype that allows those kinds of meetings to happen quite readily and fairly inefficiently as it relates to cost. So I would definitely say that if you can use Skype over any other option, simply because you can validate who you're speaking with.
And is there differences in how you would conduct an interview like that as opposed to one in person?
No different. You are going to be inquiring on the same kinds of questions. The one thing to keep in mind is that if you intend on assessing that individual, you'll need to be able to do that electronically.
Excellent. And moving on to reference checks, we had someone ask if you were to do a reference check and found out that some information that had been told to you in an interview was a little bit different from something that the reference says, for instance, why they left the organization, how would you handle a situation like that?
I think that you first want to ensure that you are inquiring on the same bits of information from reference point to reference point to start with. The second is you will need to be careful that you are not reporting back to the individual or to the hiring manager in a verbatim fashion, so that when you do report information back about information that you have researched, you need to present it in a way that does not compromise the confidentiality of the person that you've received that information from. So you would want to report it back in a generalized way, but certainly you would be at liberty to perhaps go back to that employee to revalidate what response they gave you when you asked them that very same question relative to the response you received from the referee when you asked them that question. And then at that point, you have a judgment call to make.
And when it comes to credentials, is there any recommendations that you have for verifying these credentials other than asking for a copy of the actual certificate?
Certainly, that is the best way, is to receive a copy of those credentials, but certainly there are a number of back check organizations that can conduct those kinds of research for you.
And again, also on sort of the privacy side of things, is it necessary to have some sort of a signed release from the candidate before you start checking references?
It is optimal to have their permission, whether it's a signed release or whether it's an email that you send to the individual that confirms their agreeability to you verifying their references. You should have some form of documentation available to demonstrate your due diligence on that front.
And once a decision's been made on, a successful candidate, what's the sort of standard practice for notifying other potential candidates, including internal candidates?
Mm-hmm. I will say to you that there are varying stages of communications throughout the process. So there should be some level of communication with the job seekers when their applications are received. And with technology today, it's very simple to set up an auto reply message that immediately lets the candidate know that their message was received. Following that, if you have spent time speaking to the applicant, exploring their experience for potential inclusion to a shortlist, if you decide that that individual at that point in time will not be moving forward with your shortlist, I would suggest that you will want to notify the individual with a fairly standard thank you, interest in, and time as when we spoke on X date. At this time, we have determined other candidates who better meet the criteria for the job, something to that nature. And that should go out when you have actually confirmed your shortlist and you know who will not be moving forward with personal interviews. After you move on to your personal interviews, and perhaps it's round one of personal interviews, you may be meeting with 6 to 8 candidates, and you're looking to narrow it down to your top 3 candidates. You've gone through your first round of interviews and you know who your top 3 candidates are. You then again want to communicate out to those other individuals that you will not be moving forward with. A similar templated kind of letter can go out to that individual, and all of this can be done electronically. And then, of course, when you get down to your top 3 candidates, this will be a little trickier to manage because you will likely want to have a primary candidate and a contingency candidate. And I would highly recommend that you always have a contingency candidate. Even though there may be one candidate that is high on your list of being the right candidate, You definitely want to leave yourself with a plan B, because if your primary candidate is as good as you think they are, it's likely that somebody else is looking at them as well. And so you will be competing for your A candidate. So definitely you'll want to keep a B candidate in mind, and you'll want to check references on both your A and your B candidates so that you are ready to move with Plan B if you need to.
Excellent. And just going back to job postings, we just have a couple of questions here about job postings themselves. What's one of the most effective ways to present a job posting? Should they be focusing on listing the duties of the position or identifying core competencies?
You will want to cover off a few components of job posting. You'll want to definitely give the individual a sense of who the organization is and what the organization is all about. You'll want to give the individual a synopsis of what they will be expected to do on the job, and you'll have to be selective with what it is are the key or primary elements of the job. And then, of course, you'll want to give the job seeker a sense of what the key competencies, key requirements are in order to perform that job well. So 3 distinct components of your posting.
And what are your recommendations, Veronica, on having salary posted in the job posting? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages to doing that?
Well, certainly this is going to be a function of the kind of organization that you work in. Certainly within unionized environments, that's very much an expectation that that information is made public. In non-unionized environments, it will depend on the organization's level of transparency as it relates to compensation matters. And so if you're in an organization where ranges are kept very close to the chest and that kind of information isn't widely shared, it will be difficult for you to then announce that on a posting without any amount of trickling effect for the organization. So it will depend on where you are as an organization as it relates to transparency on that front.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, that seems to draw us to a close in terms of questions, and I see we're reaching the top of the hour here. So I'd like to just thank you again, Veronica. I think we've all learned a lot today. There's been a lot of information here, and thank you again. I'd also like to thank all of our participants for joining us today and for continuing to choose Charity Village for your recruitment needs. Remember that we will be sending out a follow-up email within the next few days, and that will have a link to the webinar recording and the slide presentation. There's also going to be a link to a follow-up survey, and I hope that you'll be able to spare us a few moments to complete that, just to help us for future webinars. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.